All right, we are at the top of the hour, so let's start with a few of the preliminaries while we see who drifts in. Welcome. IETF 109, I guess, is underway here with the first of the working group sessions for the week. My name is Patrick McManus. Got my co-chairs here, Ben Campbell, and an incoming co-chair of Kirsty P. We'll talk about that in a moment as we go. Here's our agenda for today. We can have just a look over it, but from the top, we of course need a note taker for this session. Braun, I believe, offered to do that on the mailing list. I'm not sure if I see you, Braun, in the participant list or not. Let's see. Feel free to grab the microphone and shout out if you're there. Gonna need a note taker before we get going. So if Braun isn't there yet, would anyone else be willing to pitch in? I know the timing is tough. The system is new. And we have a hot agenda to get to, but we do need someone to take minutes before we can proceed. All right, we'll go with this one. Can you hear me? I do feel a little like I'm talking into a void today.
We can hear you, Patrick. I think what we've got is the moment where everyone's trying to be quiet and not be noticed while you're asking for note takers.
I know it's easier to avoid eye contact in this virtual format than it is in the room.
We need the feature to turn on people's video remotely. So hopefully Braun will join shortly, but we could certainly use a second note taker one way or the other. So please, anyone.
Well, Kirsty said in the Jabber room that she can take notes. So.
Okay.
Okay.
I just paged away from the Jabber room. I missed that.
That'll work out great. And Ben, you're going to keep an eye on Jabber, right? It sounds like.
Well, apparently I'm supposed to be, but here we go.
All right.
Looking at
Excellent.
Jabber now.
All right. With those preliminaries out of the way, you can see our agenda in front of us. We're going to have a short discussion from our ADs. We have 2 dispatch items to talk about. As a reminder, the purpose of dispatch is really to be a friendly and welcoming place to new work to the IETF and to help it find the permanent home where it will really be developed. This working group itself very rarely adopts a draft. The more likely and desirable outcomes are to find an existing working group for draft, to discuss whether or not perhaps a mini working group would be in order, perhaps a BOF would be in order, and to make a recommendation amongst those things, or even perhaps a recommendation not to proceed at all with the work to the ADs who, of course, get to make the actual decisions. So we have a couple things to talk about under dispatch, the HAPTIC top-level media type and the WebRTC HTTP ingestion protocol. This is a joint meeting with the art area, which means we'll also highlight some other stuff going on in the art area of the IETF this week, and have an FYI discussion of work that may be even like too early for being dispatched, but is of interest and could take feedback from this audience as well, that Alexi will be presenting on media types, or rather content types, to distinguish between forward and encapsulated encrypted emails, I believe. Okay. A reminder of our mailing lists, art@ietf.org and dispatch@ietf.org being the mailing list. And we don't have our note well in these slides. I'm sorry, that's my oversight. But I will refer everyone, especially given that this is the first meeting of the week, to in your favorite search engine, look up IETF Note Well. Those are important terms under which your contributions with the IETF are governed. A contribution is almost anything you do that interacts with other folks in a semi-public IETF context. So that could be a mailing list, that could be this meeting. And so those cover things, rules both related to IPR as well as your code of conduct during these meetings. So if you're not familiar with that, please do take a look. All right, that's the usual getting started stuff out of the way. And with that, we can move over to our first speaker, which I think is going to be our ADs. I don't know, Barry, is that going to be you?
That will be me, and you should have my video now. So hi, yes, everybody, welcome to the online IETF 109. For some people like our Asian friends and the down under people, it's a good time zone. For some of us, it's going to be an interesting week. But I'd like to start by, most of you know that fairly recently our beloved colleague and good friend Jim Schad died. And I'd like to just take a moment of silence to recognize Jim and his contributions, the working groups he's chaired, the documents he's edited, the smiles he's shared, and the wine he's made. So a bit of silence for Jim. Thanks, and I won't do the full minute for that, but we all remember him fondly. Sorry. The next thing is a bit of happier news. We have a new chair. As many of you also know, we've been interested in rotating chairs in this particular working group to give different people a shot at having something to do with bringing new work into the art area and being more exposed to things in the art area. So Ben is rotating out, and Kirsty Payne from the UK National Cybersecurity Centre is rotating in, and she will be our new chair starting at this meeting. So as we speak right now, I am clicking the button to update the data tracker for Kirsty, and at the end of the meeting, at the end of the week, I will remove Ben from the chair list. And there you have some video from Kirsty. Kirsty, say hi. Yes.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, nice to be here this morning. It's nice to see you all. Thanks. I'm looking forward to chairing Dispatch.
Okay, and that's all I had to say. Murray, is there anything you'd like to say before we move on? And hearing nothing from Murray, let's go ahead. Thanks, guys.
Awesome, Kirsty, that's great. I don't want to overlook thanking Ben, either, who's really done the yeoman's work here the past few months, which I've really, really appreciated, and you've left us in a great place. So, thank you, Ben, for your efforts. We can do sort of the Meet Echo golf clap. I'm sure everyone who's muted is showing appropriate appreciation, but sincerely, Ben, thank you so much. And with that, we can move on to our first dispatch item of the day, which is the haptics presentation. Do we have our speaker available? Yeshwant?
Yes. Hi,
Right.
Patrick. This is Yashwant.
Hello. So I'm going to show your slides because it just disaster always happens if
Okay.
if we don't have the chairs to do that. But when you want a new slide, just shout out next slide. I'll take care of that.
Okay. Given that this is my first ever IETF meeting, what's the protocol? Do I need to have my video on while I'm talking? I mean, I'm happy to go either way.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure I'm following.
That's up to you, but I think the trend is towards more video, and I personally think it's nice when the speakers
right.
do that. Would you like questions during or questions at the end?
Questions during is fine. If I'm not able to answer the question, I will ask until I get through the slide and then answer them, but questions during the talk is fine. And I am assuming I have about half an hour according to the agenda, is it correct?
Including the question time, that's correct. And Ben and Kirsty will monitor the queue, and they'll just like pipe in directly with any questions that need to be addressed. So with that, take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. And hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon if you're in a time zone where it is afternoon. My name is Yashwant Muthusamy. I work for Immersion, and I'm going to be presenting our ID on a proposal for haptics as a top-level media type. Next slide, please, Patrick. Okay, just a quick introduction. Haptics refers to the generation of touch-related sensation. It's a slight vibration that you feel when you're trying to set the date and time on your iPhone or other smartphone. It's used widely in a number of consumer devices for when you're using your virtual keyboard or to get any kind of vibrating notifications. And off late in many of the cars, the dashboard buttons are usually replaced by a large touch screen that provides a bidirectional touch interface. And the thing about haptics is it requires some kind of actuation in order to create that tactile sensation. In a mobile device, that actuation is provided by small vibrating motors or actuators. In a larger automotive touchscreen, these actuators are piezoelectric materials. And haptics are, these days, they seem to be everywhere. The most recent example is a Sony PS5 DualSense controller, which has just been released, and it's getting a lot of good press because of its haptics controller. Pretty much all of the smartphones on the market have haptics in them, and they are right. Haptics is considered pretty essential for enhanced media experiences. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just an indication of the differences between version 00, which has been on the dispatch mailing list since the middle of October, and version 01, which I uploaded a few hours ago. I apologize for this late breaking update, but until late yesterday evening, I didn't know I was going to be presenting here. So thanks to an email snafu at our end, I wasn't aware of this presentation. So I kind of had to scramble and get the new version out. The new version tries to address all of the comments which we have received on version 00 on the dispatch mailing list. And specifically, it tries to, I've added prose to dispel the inadvertent misconception that some people seem to have gotten from version 00, that these following haptic subtypes were already in use. That is not the case. The haptic data formats like AHAP and OGG and IBS and HAPT are indeed widely in use, and we expect them to live under the haptics top-level type once it's approved. So I made that point more clearer. And based on feedback from more than one person, I've added the sections on the subtype registrations for haptic/IBS and haptic/HAPT just to illustrate how those subtype registrations would be handled once we have haptics approved at the top level. I've added a number of new references that show the progression of the standardization of haptics in MPEG and the availability of documents for the various haptic data formats that we envision to live under the haptics top-level type. So that is the basic differences. So if people have read version 00, I just want to point out that my presentation is going to be based on version 01, and this slide kind of gives you an indication of what is different, which you may not have gone through. Next slide, please. Okay, in the next series of 8 slides, I basically go through various justifications for why we believe haptics needs to be treated as a top-level type, and that's what that's what you're going to be seeing. The first slide here is basically more of an introduction, so to speak. Haptic signals provide an additional layer of entertainment and overall sensory immersion, and as the user experience and enjoyment of media content can be significantly enhanced if you add haptics to the audio video content in ISO BMFF files. Media streams like ATSC 3.0 broadcast. For those who may not be aware, ATSC 3.0 is the next generation of the TV standard. It's an international standard, but mainly used in the US and South Korea, and also in streaming games and mobile advertising. And I mentioned the last part, mobile advertising, because it provides a good segue into the last point on the slide, which is haptic tracks in separate files are already being combined with audio video files and played back in sync to provide an overall immersive media experience. So it's not just audio visual, but now you have audio visual and tactile. And the mobile advertising business that my company used to have actually used this exact mechanism. Next slide, please. And to date, there hasn't been a registration of formats for haptics, but starting in April, haptics was proposed as a first order media type, which means that it's at the same level as audio and video tracks in the ISO-based media file format. And this proposal that we made was accepted by the MPEG Systems File Format Group. And then it has since progressed to DAN, which is a draft amendment at the October meeting, which ended in October 16th, after passing a worldwide CD ballot. So it is moving on to the next stage in the standardization. And if it progresses at its pace, it's expected to issue as an amendment, which would be the equivalent of an international standard in October 2021. And when that happens, it will become part of the ISO IEC 14496 Part 12, 6th edition. And this is a question we get asked often. What is going to be the designation for haptics in MP4 files, given that video/MP4 is already taken and audio/MP4 is already taken, and we do realize that. And so if a video, an MP4 file has got video, audio, and haptics, then we are not going to mess with the designation. It's going to still be video/MP4. The same goes for if a file has audio and haptics and happens to be a .mp4 file. We are not going to change the designation. But we do envision to MP4 files with just haptic tracks in them, and the examples of such files would be MP4 files used for streaming games, or haptic files for haptic vests and bodysuits and belts and gloves. And for those files, we envision the designation haptic/MP4. Next slide, please. Okay, now there are, for the longest time, haptics was kind of to a lot of people, haptics meant either the buzzing or the rumble in the older game controllers, or just the vibrating feedback that you had on the older phones. But haptics has actually got multiple sub-modalities. Vibrotactile, which is a touch vibration, is just one of them. The force feedback, which you will feel in the Sony PS5 DualSense controller, is called kinesthetic haptics. And the surface haptics is for the friction, and where you can actually get the different types of, you can get the feel of different textures. So you can actually get the feeling that you're feeling that you're actually touching rock or soft silk or a sharp object, or all that because of the surface friction that you feel on your fingertips. And then you have the spatial non-contact haptics, which is based on ultrasound. And last but not least, you have the thermal haptics. So these are all the different submodalities of haptics that you need to take into account. And designating haptics as a top-level media type would allow us the definition, would enable the definition of these data formats pertaining to these submodalities in a more streamlined manner. And you will not be able to do this with this level of the required granularity if you were to place haptics willy-nilly under any of the existing top-level types like audio, video, or application. Next slide, please. And this, in my opinion, is a pretty compelling reason. Your mileage might vary. I mean, for the human sense of hearing, we have the top-level media type audio. For the human sense of seeing, we have the top-level media type video. And for the equally important human sense of touch, I think it makes perfect sense to have the top-level media type haptics. And more to the point, placing haptics under audio or video is not reflective of the kinds of files or the use cases that would need haptics, but would really have nothing to do whatsoever with audio or video. Next slide, please. Okay, and there is a considerable amount of commercial uptake, as I kind of mentioned in passing earlier. It is rapidly becoming a standard feature of many CE devices, and these bullet points basically give you an idea of the extent of the uptake. iPhone, as you see here, is over 191 million. This is data from last year, the last year for which full year data is available, and it does have native support for haptic encoded data, the AHAP format, as well as the core haptics API. For those of you who are familiar with the iOS platform, in Android, you have API support of haptic buffers. W3C has got an HTML vibration API, which provides haptic support in the mobile web browsers. I've already mentioned the game consoles, and those remain a very popular CE device, or close to 40 million units sold. And then XR is an upcoming market, and helped in large part by the first version of the Kronos Open XR haptic API. And so haptic media is expected to be commonly exchanged between these devices. And since these devices in total, they represent a majority of CE devices around the world, I think a strong case can be made for haptics to be a top-level media type. Next slide, please. And the haptic data formats are already in use. These are prevalent in a large number of devices around the world, and these would live as subtypes under the proposed haptics top-level media type once it's standardized or once it's registered. The AHAP format, which is the Apple Haptic and Audio Pattern Data Format, this is the de facto standard encoding on all iOS devices and iOS connected game peripherals, and of late it has seen usage and adoption beyond Apple devices as well. Very recently in Android 11, Google has introduced a proprietary extension to the OGG format, specifically to enable the encoding of haptic media in OGG files. The IVS haptic data format is a vendor-specific format as of now that is in use in mobile phones from LG Electronics, a number of models like the V30, V40, and the newest V50 that are sold worldwide, and gaming phones from ASUS, especially the ROG 1 and the ROG 2 and ROG 3, which are also available worldwide. The haptic data format is another vendor-specific format, which is used in mobile haptic advertising, as well as the following two game developers in Japan you use them as part of Immersion's TouchSense SDK. Next slide, please. Now, these subtypes haven't yet been standardized, but they live in terms of they live in an informative annex that we made as part of our MPEG ISO BMFF proposal, and we proposed the following distinct 4cc codes for them. Once again, these codes are not registered yet, but the standardization pertaining to these is ongoing in some cases, and the plan is to standardize these haptic coding formats in the near future. The first one is HMPEG or HMPG. This would be the 4cc code for the coding format that is chosen as the winner for the recently issued MPEG call for proposals on the coded representation of haptics. This draft call was issued at the October meeting at the MPEG 132. The final call is expected to be issued at MPEG 133 in January, and the RM0 technology, or which is RM0, is MPEG speak for the coding format which wins the competition. That is expected to be selected at the April meeting at MPEG 134. And the HIEE is the 4cc code for the IEEE P1918.1.1 vibrotactile coding standard, which is currently under development as part of the IEEE Tactile Internet Initiative. And then the HNEM is the enumerated effects haptic coding format that's based on MIDI, and HAVC is a audio to vibe haptic coding format, which basically refers to the growing area of automatic A to V or audio to vibration conversion algorithms. So once standardized, these formats will live as the subtypes under the proposed haptic top-level media type. Next slide, please. Okay, we have gotten this feedback when we first put it on the media types list, and from talking to others as well. But in our view, haptics really doesn't belong under any other media type, and we see the following three reasons as the main reason why the haptics media type does not fit under the application top-level type. Haptics connects to a sensory system for touch or motion directly and is more specific than the abstract application type. Application historically has been used for applications that is code, which means it's viewed and treated with great care for security. Haptics is not code in much the same way that audio and video are not code either. And haptics is a property of a media stream. It's not an application under any normal definition. As such, we think it should be its own type, own media type. Next slide, please. This is a somewhat involved slide, but I felt it necessary to make these points because we were told as part of the instructions for RFCs that we need to be very explicit. So I'm going to try and just touch on the highlights here. Signal data is typically, haptics data can be represented as collections of signal data, or it could be represented as descriptive text in XML or JSON or a similar format. Signal data is typically not executed by endpoint processors, so there is not much risk there, but descriptive text is parsed and represented in memory using XML data structures. Then this data is then further utilized to construct one or more signals, which are then sent to the actuation hardware. And because of the media rendering nature of the data path for haptic coded data, you can think of the security profile of haptic data would be pretty consistent with the security profile of visual or audio media data. So there is some security risk, but it's no more or no less than the security risk that you need to be aware of when you're dealing with audio and visual media data. And then media rendering systems are normally implemented with a mix of user and kernel space execution, since this media must be ultimately make their way to a hardware system. So in theory, you could have malicious instructions that are present in the descriptive haptic media, and those could execute arbitrary code in kernel space, effectively bypassing system permission structures or execution sandboxes. And so haptics, audio, video, and media data have widespread use, and careful attention need to be paid by the operating system and device driver implementers to ensure that the synthesis and rendering parts do not provide attack surfaces or malicious payloads. Any coded representation of media, haptic media, is insufficient to implicitly provide sufficient security, and this protection should really be enforced by the OS implementer. Next slide, please. Okay, now we are in the IANA considerations. So here, when you say that haptics is a primary media content type, it implies that the content defined by it requires a certain haptic subsystems, such as the low-level haptics APIs, and those in turn require hardware capabilities, such as one or more actuators or vibration motors to actually render the haptic media. Now, the haptic media type does not provide any specific information about the underlying data format or how that haptics information should be interpreted. Those subtypes defined within a haptics tree, those would name the specific haptic formats. And if you have any unrecognized subtypes of haptics, those should be treated as application/octet stream. Okay, next slide, please.
I just wanted to point out the timing. There were 20 minutes left in the slot. Please be sure and leave room for discussion.
Right, I am about 3 slides away from being done. Is that okay?
Sure, just go a little fast.
Okay, all right. This is a boilerplate stuff. I mean, the registration procedure, if you worked with RFCs, you know what happens here. Next slide, please. Okay, these are the last 2 slides, I believe. These are, we just give examples of the IVS haptic type. It's the subtype would be IVS, and the file extension would be .ivs or .ivt, and this is a device independent haptic effect coding. I think the rest of the part I will let you read on your own time. I will point out that there is a published specification that was recently published by MPEG. Unfortunately, the MPEG website seems to be down, or they are in the process of updating, so the link is not available. Next slide, please. This is the haptic format. So, and the file extension would be .hapt, and this is a device-dependent haptic coding effect that's based on the RIF standard, the resource interchange file format standard, and that's pretty much all I want to say about that. And I believe that brings me to the last slide. Next slide, please. That's it. Any questions, comments, critiques?
People in queue, I seem to have forgotten how to let them in. Hang on. I think you're up.
You just call on them. They let themselves in.
Ben, you don't let them in directly anymore. Just tell them to go and they unmute their own audio.
Tim, go ahead when you're ready.
Just wanted to hear a couple of scenarios where you'd send haptics data over the wire all by itself.
Okay. I think I'd given a few examples there, but if you, in the case of streaming games, and if you wanted to send the haptic data by itself to the controller, it will not have any audio or video because it's mainly meant for your controller, which most likely deals with kinesthetic feedback. The other time where you can expect haptics to be sent over the wire just by itself, if you had a wirelessly connected bodysuit or a vest, for example. I mean, this might seem a bit far-fetched, but in reality, there were at least 3 or 4 companies at last year's CES which actually were showing these kinds of haptic bodysuits with up to between 12 to 24 different actuators. And the other one is, if you want to pre-cache effects for ads or games, that's also a haptics only use case. Does that help answer the question?
Magnus, I think you're
up. About, does this top-level type gonna imply that we actually update RFC 6381 on the codecs parameters for container file formats?
Are you talking about
6381? So the codecs parameter, yeah, for example, which is used with ISO-based media file formats. So and MP4. So this is the codecs parameters. I mean, you have the ISO CC formats for haptics, which already today allows you to tell this is a container file with these haptics types in it. But do we have a direction in the other way that we need to do something about?
Okay, I mean, I will have to admit to not having gone through 6381, but if you are referring to haptic codec specific parameters, we do envision those being standardized once the MPEG CFP, which deals specifically with an MPEG coding format standard, once that standard is finalized in next April or in the June time frame. So I would, at that point, I would envision 6381 to be needed to be updated.
Okay, just look at it and consider if we're going to need to do something in the other direction, also actually updating that format if this happens. So
okay,
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So this might be a good time to jump in and remind folks to try and be responsive to the fundamental dispatch questions we're dealing with, as well as the merits of the proposal. So if we get fairly nuanced questions, this might not be the right venue to work them through. And actually what we're trying to do is find the right venue. So, so please be responsive to that question as we explore this. Larry,
hi, this is Larry. Larry Vicente. If you think about applications that use media types, you know, the idea that you could say haptics blah instead of application blah or audio blah, you have to make up some new MIME types for the individual formats because audio doesn't carry them. Video does nothing other carries. But if you think about generic format applications that know that if something is audio, that they can do something with it. They know it has timing, that it lasts a certain amount of time, that you can associate metadata with portions of it, that you can mix it together with other audio streams to create a new kind of audio stream. And you can't do that with video, and they wouldn't know about haptics. that you might be better off using audio for haptics just to work in applications like video editing applications and Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere, After Effects. They would automatically take this as a different kind of soundtrack and fit it in, whether or not it was haptics or audio, but they'd have to add more stuff that would know about haptics specifically as a new top-level mind type.
Okay.
I didn't hear you say, you gave a good justification for not using application or video, but I didn't hear about audio.
Okay. Yeah, I can respond to your question and comments. The first point is haptics is not typically encoded in the same way as audio. And point number two is that the whole point of our MPEG ISO BMFF proposal, which has progressed to the DAM stage, which is the draft amendment stage, is to treat haptics as a first order media type at the same level as audio and video. And we actually have a working implementation of our proposal that works both on iOS and Android devices that shows that you could have an MP4 file which now has 3 tracks. And as far as your point about the audio tools, all of those tools use I mean, they all ingest MP4 files. Now, it is true that, I mean, once you have haptics as part of the ISO BMFF standard, they are going to be a third track in an MP4 file, and there might need to be changes to be made in the media player engine that now recognizes the hapt box in ISO BMF, in the ISO BMFF header, and make allowance for that. But that's just the progression of the standard. It's no different than the next version of any other MPEG standard. Now, that being the case, the third point I would make is haptics is in many cases, like if you take the AHAP format, the AHAP format, if you've ever looked at an AHAP file, it's actually a bunch of JSON. So it's a very descriptive file format that basically says at what offset with respect to the audio timeline do you want to play out a haptic effect, which could be a short click or a buzz or some kind of a transient, and at what percentage strength you want that transient to be played. So those kinds of things you can't really do with an audio format, and it's for those reasons we didn't want to shoehorn haptics into any of the existing audio formats. We felt that you could get the most flexibility and benefit from the growing field of haptics if it were its own top-level type.
Thank you, Yashwant.
Sure.
Do you have an opinion on how you think this could be best dispatched, or are you really in a position where you really need advice on that?
I mean, that seems like you are asking me if I know the procedure in IETF. I mean, I would be looking to you for that. I mean, what would you consider to be the next step? I mean, we have made a case, and we have addressed all of the comments we have gotten so far.
I really appreciate the thorough presentation. I mean, I think I asked the question just to make sure, to refocus the conversation we're having on that dispatch question, and to make sure,
sure,
you know, if you had an opinion on that, as some folks do when they're making their dispatch presentations, that was clear to the group. But I want to make sure.
I mean, my question back to you. I'm sorry to respond to a question with a question. Is what is needed to convince this group that this is a viable top-level type? And does the group think there is something else missing? If not, obviously we would like to take this to the next stage. So
sure. I mean, fundamentally, that will be driven through IETF consensus, and the purpose of this exercise here is just to get it into the room
Sure.
that will start making those forms. We will not reach consensus on dispatch on the merits of it. So, Jana, you're next. If you can speak to this part of the question, I would appreciate it. We've only got about 6 minutes left here.
I can't hear you, John.
Jana Iyengar. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to ask, and this is probably a question for the area directors or the dispatch chairs. Given that this draft has gone through one iteration and there's been presumably some engagement on the mailing list, is what I gather. Now, I've not paid attention to that, but are there other folks besides Immersion Technologies that are interested? Presumably they are, and are they willing to come here and engage at the IETF? The reason I ask this question is because this depends, to me at least, where this lands kind of depends on who the other parties that are interested are. I can read the draft, and to me it makes sense to have haptics as a high-level thing, but it doesn't matter because I'm not the one building this stuff. So I'm curious to hear if there are others who have expressed interest in having a standard on this, if they've expressed an interest in actually building to the standard were it to be described. Because ultimately, what you're trying to do is generate consensus among people who are engaged on the details of the draft. And for that, you'd need people who are not just interested on the side, but are actually implementing and deploying this stuff. Are there people
Sure.
like that?
Sure. Yeah. I can respond to that. There is actually an IEEE effort which is ongoing, and as I mentioned, it's the P1918.1.1, which is a haptics codex for the tactile internet. It is and that working group is actually in the process of finalizing the vibrotactile coding standard for the haptic vibrotactile coding standard, as well as a kinesthetic haptic coding standard. And they are a number of academic institutions as well as companies who are active there, and they're actually implementing those two standards. That is one. Apple is quite active in MPEG, ISO BMFF. In fact, the chair of the MPEG systems file format subgroup is David Singer. He's from Apple, and Apple has their own haptic format, and they have actually been quite active because they have an interest. They have a business interest in haptics, so they've been quite active in creating this MPEG CFP, which I mentioned, the call for proposals. Now, outside of that, a little bit of anecdotal evidence might be, but Immersion founded what is known as haptics, what is known as the Haptics Industry Forum, which has now grown to over 50 companies in the haptic space, and they are all active in that area.
Yeshwan, I don't want to cut you off, but I think we're going to
have
to
I'm done.
move this along. So
right.
Stefan just jumped into the end. That'll have to be the end of the queue. I'm going to ask people to be real quick. I think we're going to be okay on overall agenda time, but we do need to wrap this up. So Spencer, you're next.
Thank you. So the thing I'm seeing in the chat is basically, this is a top level registration. So maybe a working group is appropriate for that. A short-lived working group is appropriate for that. Does anybody disagree with that? Then I'll get out of the queue.
So I believe Barry has made an offer to AD sponsor on a couple of occasions. I'd appreciate it if maybe he would get in the queue and give his view on this as well. But meanwhile, Richard. You with me, Richard?
Hey, Yeah, it's just busy granting permission prompts. Real quick comment here. I think this is a very natural AD sponsor. I think we should not waste the bandwidth to establish a working group on this. IETF last call and the ensuing discussion will be plenty to nail down any of the questions that have been raised here. That's it.
Brass tacks, I love it. Pete? No audio, Pete. We'll come back, or we'll get your comments relayed. Mo, are you available?
I think the top level type makes sense. So I do support that. On the question of where to dispatch to, and is there any point in a work group, I think the relevant question is, what do you plan to do beyond the top level type? Do you plan to have any of these elementary stream formats standardized within IETF? Or do you plan to have payload formats in AVT core carrying these? Or do you plan to describe them in SDP and MMusic? I think that would make it more relevant of what level of integration this has with other IETF work other than just the top level type.
Okay, I can try to answer that. I mean, at least one of the four formats which I've mentioned is not going to be under IETF. It's going to be done by IEEE. And the second one, the HMPG, will probably fall out of the work that's ongoing in MPEG, which leaves the remaining two, the HENM and the HAVC. Those are possibilities for standardization under IETF, but I can't speak to them just yet because we don't know how it's going to go with the first two.
And one personal comment, is there any format that supports spatial haptics encoded along with the video stream so that you have spatially and dynamically variant haptic fields? Is that standardized anywhere?
Not yet, but it's interesting. You should bring up spatial haptics because that is part of phase 2 of our MPEG CFP, and it's under the overall umbrella of MPEG-I or MPEG immersive media. So once phase 2 of the CFP is over, we do expect something on spatial haptics to be standardized. But it's probably, the short answer to your question is it's too early to say.
So I'm going to jump in real quick with Pete's comment from earlier that he was unable to make, which is that he doesn't think a work group is necessary, that AD sponsored would be reasonable. And some of the commentary we've seen in the chat is along the lines that AD sponsoring plus calling out to the right experts is a way to approach it. That's not my opinion. That's relaying stuff I'm seeing in the chat.
That's great. Thank you, Ben. Stefan is next. Cullen, you jumped in the queue after the queue was closed, so I'm going to cut you, but we do appreciate our emeritus chairs in any event. Stefan.
So two things. One is I'm supportive of getting this top-level domain done. That's my personal comment. One comment as IETF's liaison to MPEG. This activity is by no means the most active, but also by no means the quietest that MPEG has. There is a significant amount of industry interest visible that goes well beyond one startup company. Thank you.
And we have Barry and Murray left in the queue as our ADs.
Yes, I think this is the primary discussion of this will be on the media types list. I think we don't need a working group to do this, but I think I do want to defer to the community for the decision on that. So I'm hearing mostly people thinking AD sponsored is fine, and I'm good with that. And Murray being next, he'll tell you whether he's willing to be the sponsor or not, and he's a media type reviewer anyway. So I'm done.
Yeah, I'm happy to sponsor this if that's what the community wants to handle this. It's fine with me.
Great.
So the chairs are huddling in our chat, and I think we're hearing that is the most common view, and are leaning towards suggesting that as the rough consensus outcome of this meeting. Does anyone want to stand up and say that that's doesn't match what they've heard? Go ahead, Colin.
So yeah, I would like to have a chance to speak, please, as I was in the queue before the tool dropped me for the second time. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that draft is going to require, so first of all, I think we should do this. Okay, no question about we should move forward with some sort of top-level type. But the hint of Magnus's question, several other people's that have worked in this space before, has been like, there's some really complicated trade-offs because nothing's perfect in this space. The audio plus video is already a disaster to explain when you use one and when you use the other. And this is going to expand that. And I think that it's not that this draft's complicated. It's that the set of contradictory rules we've already set up in this space is going to be complicated. And there's going to be no way to get this draft to meet every single one of our existing rules simultaneously. And I think that that complexity is one of the reasons that I would argue that given we already have very experienced media type people expressed that this shouldn't even be done at IETF, you may not want to have that whole conversation on the IETF last call list, which is where it's going to end up if you AD sponsor it. Now, it's clearly the AD's call whether they want to sponsor or not. It's not even a matter of dispatch. Dispatch has no input on whether an AD chooses to sponsor it yet. But I think the AD should think about that conversation. And I think we need to have a way of making sure we get consensus, get people involved when the tool's broken. Like, we need something better here. This isn't working.
All right. Oh, and Murray cleared himself out of the queue. Ben, Christy, do you have anything you want to add to the wrap up here? Or is this a case where we need to consult the minutes and write a summary of where we're
at? What I would take, this is Ben, I think with Cullen's last comment there, and it probably makes sense, this is the dispatch conversation needs to continue, because I don't think we've necessarily reached a resolution. So we probably need some discussion among the authors, chairs, and area directors in the very near future, and see if we can resolve that. But I don't hear a resolution right now between AD sponsored and some other higher weight.
Presumably a new working group. I agree. I think we should continue to have that discussion, and further input on the list is, I think, appropriate, right?
I'd like to stick one quick thing in response to Cullen. I suppose the ADs can decide to AD sponsor anything they want to. But one of the reasons we have dispatch is exactly so we will listen to what dispatch has to say about these things. So thanks for your comments on that. And Yeshwant, I want to make it clear to you that the message I'm getting from this is we're going to do this. It's just a question of whether we do it in a new working group or just with AD sponsorship, and that's the only thing that we have to decide at this point.
Okay, and so I'm assuming that I will find out soon enough from one of you gentlemen as to what the direction is.
Yeah, we'll be in touch. Please also, read the dispatch list, but we'll certainly be directly
yes, absolutely.
with you as author. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Just for the sake of agenda time, we need to move on. Sergio, are you with us?
Yeah. Hello.
There you are. Hi.
Hello.
The floor is yours. Just shout out. Next slide.
Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, so WebRTC is still the best media transport used for streaming real-time audio and video, but while it is possible to use other transport for ingesting WebRTC content into a media server, when using WebRTC both for ingesting and delivering the media, allows to have several good properties. But mainly, you can work on browsers for both the publishing side and the viewer side. You avoid to have protocol translation between something that it is not WebRTC into WebRTC. This, if you have to do that, you will most probably cause delay and have to increases the complexity of the implementation, because you already are supporting WebRTC for streaming out. So implementing something different for streaming in and doing the protocol translation is going to cause will be more difficult to implement. I just have WebRTC for end-to-end, and in most, you will most probably have a protocol problems with the codecs, for example, or RTMP does not support Opus at all, so you will have to do transcoding between other codecs and the codecs that WebRTC supports. And also some features that are WebRTC only you will not be able to support it end-to-end. For example, some servers may decide to just do RTX or FEC end-to-end, just from whatever the sender supports, the publisher support to the viewer. So if you are doing other different, you are using other protocols for ingesting media that are not WebRTC, so some of these features are lost. So, however, there is no current standard signaling protocol that it is available to do this. I mean, the most close could be SIP or XMPP, but they are not used for broadcasting or streaming services, and there is no sign at all of any kind of industry adoption. Also, they are complex to implement, so it is they will not likely be used at all. And RTSP, that this could be the closest that we can have for the broadcasting industry, is not compatible with WebRTC SDP of an asset model, and also for publishing the RTCP record and doing a push from our RTCP server is not very widely supported. So the consequence is that now each service has its own implementation of custom ad hoc protocols. So you want to have an encoder that supports several WebRTC streaming services. You will have to implement one protocol for one streaming service. So this is not obviously that it is something that it is going to happen. So at least in our opinion, the consequence is that we need a new reference signaling protocol for this use case. So next slide, please. So what would be the requirements from this new streaming protocol? I mean, it needs to be simple to implement, and also simple to use. I mean, to be able to set it up or to provision an encoder with this new protocol, it will have to be as easy as you have now with an RTMP URI. So you will not have to do, you should only need to point your encoder with an URI and have the streaming app. For ingesting, the use case is quite specific. So it is only required to implement a subset of WebRTC functionality, mainly that you only need to support unidirectional flows from the encoder to the media server. Typically, the server is assumed is not like in the typical WebRTC use case that you have peer-to-peers both behind NAT. I mean, if you are broadcasting to a server, the server is assumed either to have a public IP or is deployed in the same private network as the publisher. So the NAT restriction is less difficult than in normal WebRTC peer-to-peer. And also, you don't need to support renegotiation. You are not going to, for example, in RTMP or other protocols that are used for ingesting today, you just send the media from the start, and if you want to change things, you just stop and restart again. You don't need to support renegotiation. So in the requirement obviously has to be full compliant with WebRTC and RTC web specs. Must support authentication of for the stream. Has to be both usable in web browsers and native encoders. And if possible, lower the requirement reading on to be able to be supported easily by hardware encoders by reducing some kind of functionalities that we have in WebRTC, reducing the number of or the possibilities that some of things that we have in WebRTC to just narrow down the use case, and also to be able to easily support load balancing and redirection to be able to handle massive loads of a stream into an streaming service. So next slide, please. So the proposed solution is something that it is really simple. It is just doing an HTTP post with an SDP offer from the encoder to the media server, and receiving the SDP answer from the media server. With this SDP offer and answer, you set up a WebRTC session. So mainly you just establish the ICE and DTLS connectivity, and from then on you control the state of the publication with the ICE and DTLS states. So you will use ICE content freshness for detecting if the connection of the encoder has abruptly disconnected, the encoder or the media server, and you will also use the DTLS teardown in order to know when the session has been normally terminated normally by any of both sides. Authentication will be an authorization will be supported natively by HTTP header, the authorization header with the period token. So it is just exactly what standard HTTP stuff. And also you will use it will support HTTP redirections for load balancing. So next slide, please. This is an example implementation of in JavaScript. I mean, it is, you can see, you can get more simple than that, and you just need to set up the track. You create a pre-connection and you get the offer. You do a fetch with for sending the post to the media server, receive the answer, and pass it at the set remote description. And once it is set, and you can control the state of the feed with just by the on connection state changed events received. So you have the connected, disconnected, failed, and closed. So next slide, please. We have tried to reduce the complexity, mainly because if it is going to be implemented by native encoders and hardware-based solutions, I mean, trying to reduce the requirements for implementing it was important. So we have restricted that in a way that, well, first the STP bundle is always required and RTCP maxing, so we don't support non-bundling, and also no RTCP in different ports. And the server may implement ICE Lite, and the coder must implement full ICE. And the other minor change that we have done is that we allow the encoder to just set up then implement the active setup, so not to have to implement active and passive. And the server must support both acting as only as passive, and in case that, for example, if they are interconnecting with something that is supporting also at pass, pues it has to support active or passive. I mean, if there is any other optionality that we can remove from current WebRTC in order to make it easier to implement, I mean, it will be welcome, but this is only the ones that we have found for now. And I think that it may be my last slide. Yeah. So the conclusion is that it is, I think, this is the lowest thing that we can have for having WebRTC, a easy protocol with a standard that are already available. So it is just use them, and in order to create something that it is really simple and really easy to implement. There has been some discussion if this should be make a bit more complex to have to be able to control the state of the stream by HTTP REST or something like that. But this is the bare minimum that it is required to in order to have this working and with.
Sergio,
yeah.
No, thank you for all of that. Before we open the queue, would you like to address the core dispatch question? Are you familiar with the possible locations for this work, or should we open the queue with suggestions on that from the floor?
I'm not aware what is the best thing. I mean, I think that it is really simple. I mean, the draft is available and it is really small. So I think that at least my opinion should be that it should be the whatever is best for having a fast solution. And I don't expect to have much discussion. I mean, I would not like to have to get this to grow much more than what it is. So obviously address concerns and things like that, but not make this much more complex than it is today.
Okay, great. Is there any commentary from the group? Bernard, please.
Sergio, I mean, as you showed, this is a very simple web page. You know, it's probably not a lot more complicated on the server either. So I guess my question would be why you need to standardize the protocol, given that this, you know, you just showed us the JavaScript for it, and you could implement this pretty easily.
Mainly because if I'm going to speak to a hardware encoder vendor to implement it, I need to say, please implement it so it is possible to use it with more than one service. I mean, I already have implemented it, but if it is not a standard, it would be just another thing that my server implements, but no other server implements. So if we can agree that having this as a specification, the encoder can be say that I just support WIP, and I mean it's just to try to be able to have this more to broaden the adoption of it.
Yeah, so basically you don't have control necessarily over the server, so it's not like you could write your own, you know, Python or Node.js server. You're trying to get somebody else who has kind of a, okay, I think I understand it now.
Harold.
Thank you. Harold Alvestrom, Google. I think this makes perfect sense. The point of having a document is really to have an online stable reference for it. there are a number of cases where people tend to not want to incorporate someone's bright idea or someone's unmaintained NPM or something. So having a stable reference for a really simple protocol is probably a good idea. I mean, Karen and I were trying to do something like this way back when, but failed, or it failed to gain traction at the time, probably because we were trying to incorporate it into the spec instead of just having it as a minor add-on. So I think we should just let this be published. I think informational publication as AD sponsored would be fine. So let's go.
Yeah, so I think that I may not have answered probably or very carefully to the Bernard's question before. I mean that the situation in web in streaming is different with that in common WebRTC cases, that you have one vertical that you control the clients and the streaming services. Typically in streaming, you will have hardware encoders that are or are even that works. Is, for example, with you support RTMP, you just implement RTMP and you are able to talk to Facebook, to Twitch, to a broad range of services. So the idea here is the same, to be able to have it in for example in OBS, or in the vendor for the encoder is different than the one that is deploying the streaming service. So if it is as Harald has said, having a common spec, it allows to people to be more comfortable when implementing something that they know that they will be able to use and connect to any WebRTC services, instead of now that that if I have to talk with a vendor to implement my protocol, they say, well, why I have to implement it for you if it is only going to work with your streaming service.
Victor. Oh, and Bernard, you're still in the queue. If you want to be in the queue, stay there. If it's just leftover.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I guess my main question is, what's the implementation experience status for this, especially for clients that are not web?
It is it is already implemented in both in Janus and in Medus. I mean in the Melicast streaming platform, and we have implemented it in an OBS fork that we are trying to get into the main one, but the complexity is compiling the LibRTC. But a part of the web browser we have already in OBS, and trying to get traction with the people that it is implemented in hardware encoders.
And the second, more of a clarifying question, to understand that the URLs for this are HTTPS.
Yeah. Yeah, the URL is just an HTTPS URL.
Timothy.
I just wanted to say I think this is a good thing we should be doing. I think there's some still discussion to be had on how much simpler it could be. I think there's still some optionalities that could be taken out. So I kind of think that publishing it as is it needs another round of discussion in terms of the detail from my point of view. But I think it's eminently implementable even as it is.
Jonathan.
Intended to be, sorry, this is intended to be a, I know you wrote a replacement, / standardization replacement for RTMP. Is this feature equivalent to RTMP as used? Because one thing I did notice is it didn't seem, other than the SDP proper, it didn't seem, as you wrote it, terribly extensible. So I'm a little concerned about that, but I'm also going to ask, is there anything that RTMP, does as used that this doesn't do? And if so, where would you think the extension points would properly be?
I have not understood the question. Could you please repeat?
So is this protocol as you've described it, does it do everything that RTMP does? Because I know your goal is to replace RTMP.
Yeah, well, the goal is not to replace an RTMP. I mean, RTMP or the other broadcasting protocol will be used for different things. I mean, I don't expect this to replace the current broadcasting solution for ingest. But the problem is that if, for example, if you use RTMP for WebRTC, first you are adding delay because you will have to wait in the best case when you don't have a buffering on the encoder side. You will have to have buffer per frame before you start doing the packetization. And for example, RTMP does not support Opus, so you will have to do transcoding from AAC to Opus. So this is something that I want to avoid. For example, RTMP does not support iframe requests, so I mean, there is.
So I guess that makes sense to me. I guess my question is, are going the other direction? If somebody did want to say, okay, that sounds great, I'm going to take my existing thing that's using, RTMP for this and replace it with WIP, would there be things that would run into that you'd say, oh well, I can't do this in WIP, this thing that I'm doing today?
I don't know. I mean, the main goal is to have WebRTC from end to end. So I don't know if this makes sense, for example, to ingest in WebRTC and do HLS out. I mean, probably it can make sense. I don't know how that's compared to other solutions that are in there. But if you're then trying to do WebRTC, for WebRTC ingest and WebRTC out, there is no other solution that really works. I mean, for example, if you want to use, for example, let's say if you want to stream out a JSC conference from our web browsers, and you capture the screen in one of the participants and trying to ingest it into a CDN to deliver it as WebRTC, I don't think that there is any other way to do it that the set ingesting in WebRTC.
Okay.
We'll have to cut the queue after Mo. And Ted, before you start, Sergio, can I just get some clarity on how much development work, IETF contribution, do you think needs to be done here, as opposed to, is this a static or informational document you're putting forward for the purpose of publishing in a static reference to?
I mean, I don't think that there is any. I mean, there are some open points that, for example, I know that, for example, Lorenzo and would like to have some more control of how to disconnect the session, that not just to rely on the TLS and ICE, because it could be on the worst case, you'll have to wait for the ICE disconnection for the if in case of hybrid disconnection, on if the DTLS terminal shutdown is lost. This is one point still to be discussed, and also I know that team want to discuss some other optionalities to be removed. But apart of that, I don't expect to have much more work than what it is already in the current spec.
I appreciate that. Ted, you're next.
Ted Hardy speaking after he hits the allow button again. Thanks. I just wanted to go back to the requirements slide for a moment. When I look at the requirements slide, you have two things on here which make me feel like maybe this actually does need a working group to think about. And that's when you have under the second bullet, servers assumed not to be behind a net, and also supports load balancing and redirections. My sense of this could actually get a little bit more complicated than you think if you think both of those are always going to be true in these situations. If if you have a subset of these requirements where you know it's always true, then I think the right thing to do is to take it to the ISE, have it published as this is how we are doing things for the information of the community, and stop. If you actually want a signaling protocol that's going to be able to handle the load balancing and redirection problem, especially if you're going to redirect across, say, address families, you have more stuff going on here than I think then you could certainly handle it in an AD sponsor. I think if that's something you do want to kind of hash out, then you need an actual working group to work through this. And I have no objection to a working group to work through this, but I think unless you're going to take out some of that complexity by removing some of these requirements, you probably can't go the AD sponsored route. So I would say from the dispatch questions point of view, my answer is if you really think this is done, go to the ISE. If you don't and you really want to handle this set of requirements, you need a working group. Thanks.
Yeah, but first, what I mean to support load balancing is it is just relying on the load balancing and redirection that SUBTYPE already supports. So I'm not talking about the load balancing about the media, it's just about the load balancing of the SUBTYPE supports. For example, you will be able to do an initial ACT post to a factory, and that sends a redirection to the actual media server. So it is not anything more complex than that.
So Sergio, this might be related to the heart of what I was sort of asking before Ted took his turn. If this is a situation where we're really not going to give the IETF change control over the document and it's a static done thing, then the ISE is the common recommendation in those circumstances. But it sounds like we start to go down that road and then we talk about like a number of fairly tricky things that actually probably require a bunch of different viewpoints and are more suitable really for a mini working group, if you will, instead of even for AD sponsored. So those two things are actually fairly far apart from each other on the spectrum, and so like some clarity on that might help us get us to a recommendation. While you ponder that, Mo, you're up.
Yeah, so on the surface, it seems like a good idea. If I understand right, you want to have simple devices be able to have a way to push things up, even when they can't run the full-blown browser with arbitrary JavaScript. And you want services to always expose some common ingestion point. But the thing that I question is, why do you think this has anything to do with ingestion? But seemingly a much bigger demand would be for receiving WebRTC real-time streaming, and that hasn't happened. Service providers are not letting arbitrary devices hit a simple URL. You have to have an app-based integration just to receive streaming from those services. So I question whether or not why haven't smart displays been able to simply put a URI of whatever streaming service you want and run and go with that instead of doing the full integration with the specific service. I think the same kinds of problems may hit this if you think that all services just have an easy ingestion point that's interoperable without any work on the device or app developer. I'm skeptical that we'll specify anything well enough to actually make that work.
Yeah, I completely agree that it is also something that I'm working on, but I think that there are different issues, and then the target is different. I mean, for the ingestion and the streaming implement, they are related to different people. I mean, for example, to talk about ingest, I have to talk with encoder people. And to talk about the viewing and the viewing side, I have to talk about mainly, for example, web browsers to be able to support an HTTP with something, a URL in the video SRC, and to be able to set up a view-only stream. So, while the solution may be similar, I prefer to handle them independently. But I think that it is something that it is also needed. But if just I don't want to, the solution may be similar, but the use case is different. So I would prefer to have it in different places.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, I'm reading the chat and the chair chat over on the side, trying to decide what we've heard here. I think there's still a little bit of confusion here, but people are leaning towards trying to discuss on list and build what a charter for a small mini working group might look like to try and give clarity to the work that would actually be done under IETF change control. And of course, we can dispatch things directly from the list, should that look like suitable work that the IETF wants to take on and that the ADs want to charter. But I think that's probably the next step. This has been, I think, a very useful discussion. I'm glad we've had it. But I think that probably needs to be done to crystallize what we're asking. We got probably like 3 more minutes we can spend on commentary if folks want to react to that next step plan, including Sergio, most importantly.
Mo, you still in the queue on purpose? I guess not.
Yes, no. Okay, Sergio, would that work for you? We could try and build a charter, a proposed charter, and that might clarify our thinking on whether this is right-sized or not.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we'll wrap up this and move on to the next topic. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you, you too.
I think this is where I need to do my little non-linear zipping around in the slides. We like to take a moment in each art area meeting, as we're now in the art area section of our agenda, to mention some new working groups and when they next meet. We have email core and ASDF, which have been chartered since the last time we met. I believe HTTP API has also been chartered since the last time we met, and they meet on Friday morning. And I'll highlight the other interesting meetings located down here. And then if anyone would like to step up and offer a 30-second, you should really come to this meeting testimonial for any of these or something else you think would be of interest to this working group, I would encourage you to do so. We have SecDispatch, GenDispatch, the IAB Open, the RFC Editor Future Development Program, and SHMOO, which is of continued interest to all of us, I'm sure. There's also one BOF this week, Medina's MAC address device identification for networks and application services. They are meeting on Wednesday. Does anyone else?
Isn't S-Frame also a new? Sorry. Isn't S-Frame also a new art?
S-Frame is also a new one. Good catch. Karsten, you're first.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly point out there's another new art working group, the JSON Path working group, that is picking up this format from 2007 for doing XPath-like things on JSON.
Do you know when they're meeting?
Later today. So it's not today.
Thanks. Pete, we had a lot of people in queue, but you all left.
Am I making sounds this time?
Yes.
Excellent. Just 10 seconds, GenDispatch. The only item on our agenda is an update to it's 7.2.1, which is the RFC about how working groups may wish to adopt documents or unadopt documents. So not terribly exciting stuff, but you're all welcome to come and chat about that if you like.
Thanks. All right. Last call for other announcements. Okay. Hearing none, Alexi, you have our last presentation of the day. Floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sounds good. This is obviously the most interesting presentation today, so I'll try to be quick. So Burning and I are working on NDKG in lamps on header protection for SMIME and PGP, and this is sort of came out of this whether a signal saying that a particular message is being encapsulated is useful, and we want to talk about whether it's useful in other contexts. Next slide, please. Right. So yeah, that's good. Basically, when protecting headers, we need to make a copy of the header fields within signature or an encrypted block. So they basically sort of need to be duplicated. And the way this is described in SMIME is just says to wrap it in message RFC822, which is unfortunately ambiguous because it's unclear whether it's a forwarded message or whether it's a mechanism for encapsulating headers. And the message, next slide. So this is expanded example how this might look like. So there is an outer unprotected header, little wrapper, and then the copy of it in a header and the message itself, and then the signature. Next slide. So the draft at the moment says that in order to distinguish from forwarded message, there is an extra parameter on the content type, which is forwarded, like yes or no. There was some discussion on the mailing list. Martin suggested that maybe content disposition is actually a good fit for this. For example, content disposition in line, maybe a new content disposition type, like encapsulated to make it specific for this purpose. And there was also a suggestion to maybe have a new content semantics header field to signal that. The first two proposals have advantage that they sort of work very well with IMAP because all parameters to content type and content disposition are returned within the protocol. The last one doesn't work as well, but happy to hear opinions on this. Next slide. So question for this group is, are there any other use cases other than, so basically, is this very SMIME PGP specific, or are there other ways that this can be used, and what's the best mechanism for doing this? And I think, what's the next slide? Yeah, questions.
Please, John Levine. No audio, John. We can see you. Still not. Cannot hear you. Why don't we give Bron a chance, and we'll come right back to you, John, next. Bron?
Approval of things. Content disposition feels like the right thing to me. It feels like that's exactly what this is a disposition for the message, rather than the content type of the message. But other than that, it seems like something that could be generally useful.
Thank you. Why don't we do Daniel next, then we'll give John another shot. Unless, John, are you ready? Still no audio. All right, DKG.
Hi, folks. This is DKG. I'm with the ACLU. So I've been trying to figure out how to use this forwarded equals no or content distribution or anything like this in terms of header protection. And the difficulty is that we can't tell old clients that don't know about it to respect it this way. Right, but sort of by definition, the already deployed clients are behaving differently. So I'm fine with making an indication that, yes, this is exactly how I meant it, and it wasn't supposed to be a message that was an attached message or a forwarded message. But there's still going to be a challenge when dealing with the large number of legacy clients that are out there. So in terms of, we'll be discussing header protection in LAMPS, I think, tomorrow. I think that there are other options for how to do header protection, including stuff that's actually been deployed. Enigmail has been doing, and several others have been doing header protection in a different way that has some level of backward compatibility that makes things work with existing clients. So, I'm fine with any of these ways of doing it, but I think it doesn't fundamentally solve the problem of dealing with of interacting with a legacy client. And we don't know when you're sending the message whether you are interacting with the legacy client or not. So I just think this is a very challenging space to work in, and I'm not sure that this is the right spot to do the signaling. But any of the proposals seem fine to me.
John, give it another go.
We're interested to come to the
well, it says I have audio now. Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Another use case is mailing lists and DMARC, everybody's favorite mailing list thing. Back when we were trying to fix the IETF list to work around DMARC, one of the things I tried was wrapping single messages very, very much the same way this thing does it. So there's an outside header that passes DMARC, and the inside header actually describes the message. It's basically the same scenario. My question is, why adding? It seems to me this is the message. The MIME type here would be like message encapsulated rather than adding a flag to message RFC 83822. And I agree with DKG that the current behavior of MUAs with any sort of attached or wrapped messages is pretty poor. So on the one hand, I imagine partly it's like, well, message encapsulated is likely to work worse than message global, but message global already works pretty badly. This is not a hill I'm planning to die on. It's mostly a question.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. I tend to agree with you that it's tricky.
Okay.
Harold, you're up next.
Yeah, I feel like old man yelling at cloud or something, but multipart signed was never, ever, ever, or message signed was never, ever, 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 ever intended for forwarding. So the fact is, the MUAs that display this as a forwarded message are buggy. So we can either yell at them to fix the bug, or we can add more markers that mean exactly the same thing, and then tell them to fix the bug. So I don't think this is solvable by adding more markers that mean the same thing as what we intended in the first place. Can we just get the bug fixed?
Philip, as of now, you get the last word. We'll see if anyone gets in behind you.
I support doing something on this. I mean, I think everybody in the queue and I think everybody who's played with SMIME has proposed something of the sort over the past 25 years, and there's always been the problem of the legacy SMIME clients don't do what they should or what we would want them to. I think that there's another piece that comes up, and that is when we talk about headers, there's really two types of message headers. There's content headers. There are headers that really should have always been part of the content, and there are routing headers. And SMTP just smushed the two together. And so maybe what we need to do is to disentangle those two and say which are the two things and which are different before we try and fix RFC 8281 before trying to layer more stuff on top. Because as I said, we've tried this before and it didn't get very far.
Thank you. You have any wrap-up thoughts, Alexi?
I have lots of good comments. Sorry, I'm sort of still waking up in my time zone. So yeah, I'll review the comments and we'll continue. If you're interested in the header protection topic specifically, please come to LAMPS, which is tomorrow.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that completes our structured agenda. We do have 10 minutes available if there's any other business that's available to the art area anyone would like to step forward with. Otherwise, we can conclude. Braun.
Didn't get ready in time for this meeting, but there was discussion that I emailed to the list a few weeks ago about a time format, basically updating RFC 3339. So since we have this time and no one else seems to want to discuss anything, does anyone want to talk about where they think that might be best put? So the concept is to add basically sigils afterwards that include both the time zone that a time is in and also the calendar format it's in if it's not Gregorian. So that there are people seem to be moving towards the idea of having a Gregorian timestamp always, but then saying transpose this into this calendar system to process it and keeping that sigil with the time because that's the safest for round tripping things. And this work is coming out of the JavaScript working groups, amongst other things.
Or jump right in, Harold.
And didn't we try to address this in CalDAV, CalExt, Cal something about somewhere in the late 90s?
We've done recurrence rules and R-scale, which is to say that this recurrence rule applies in a different time system than Gregorian. But what hasn't been addressed is the format. So the ISO 8601, whatever it is, sorry, not that one. Yeah, time format, or RFC 3339 time format, year, dash month, dash day, and then T and some minutes and seconds. But what we don't have is the ability to say what time zone that's in that string. And so it's stringifying a time with a time zone and a calendar system. and it's working out exactly what format we want that to be in. So
Okay,
they have
so
suggested to bring this to IETF.
So all the proposals for doing that failed the last time. So. Good
But we still need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was a stupid idea to leave out.
Thanks, Bon. Thanks, Harold. Neil, got time for one more, I think, here.
Just going to clarify on this. Yeah, it's the TC39 group developing ECMAScript, JavaScript that are currently looking for this. I think we do need a serialization format for dates with time zones. Lots of people do this, and if we don't define something, then we'll have lots of different incompatible versions out there. It seems an obvious extension to 3339 to me.
So, Bron, if people want to explore this further, what list do you think? I mean, do you think this is Dispatch, or it's probably Dispatch?
I think probably Calcify is the sensible place to discuss it, given that all the other calendaring works there.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're interested in continuing this discussion, Calcify sounds great.
Yeah. The other possible place is TZ Data. I'm subscribed to both, so I'm sure I'll see whatever you say. Thanks.
Thanks for raising it. Hey, Ben, given that we're wrapping the meeting up and this is your last meeting as chair, would you turn your video on so people can like wave goodbye to you? So I can wave goodbye to you. I want to tell people like how hard Ben has worked at this job. I mean, I think the most important part of the dispatch chair job is actually reaching out and integrating folks who just have no idea how this IETF process works. And Ben is just an exemplary instance of making that work as a chair. And so I've learned quite a bit from him, and I really appreciate it. So we'll be sad to see you go, but you know, the iStar is always happy to have you. So thanks, Ben. And thank you everyone for a good meeting, and we'll see you on the list.